when we think of stability in our society, we think of architecture. For example, when I work with Jacques Derrida, Jacques always says to me, well, what about people? What about the functions? And I said, what do you mean, what about the people? I mean, do you ever worry about the people when you're, who read your books? He said, oh, well, those are books. He said, but this is architecture. You know, this deals with shelter and comfort and things like that. And I said, well, that's a really funny thing for the arch deconstructionist to be concerned with shelter and comfort. But you see, what I said to Jacques was, I said, you philosophers are very funny because it's all right for you guys to move the whole telos of the society around. But when it comes to an architect, you say, oh, no, that's got to stay in place. So that you guys can be radical, architecture remains whole.
I mean, I can only talk about what the intentions of my work, you know, is I don't know what the others' intentions are. You know, I mean, some of them I might know, and there might be clues on other people. But I think that it had to do with the originally kind of really almost rewriting the script for architecture. And if that script could be manifested on a plan, it becomes like a new calligraphy of a plan. And the implication of that is that it could make a new kind of life, you know, and that space could be also seen in a different way.
We are only at the threshold, at the beginning of what modern architecture really is. Not at the ending, which is what postmodernism thought it was, a type of apocalyptic end of the empire of architecture, rather than an awareness that what will be happening in the future will be really going very deeply into the consequences of modernization.
The level of complexity has become such that a unifying theory of the universe is not a possibility anymore. And I find it quite interesting, that notion of a discontinuous structure, things that don't quite all come back to that common denominator. And in this respect, you find out that you can push things one step further.
I would hope that architecture would be on the verge of making a return both to the historic social commitments of modernism, and that the battles waged at places like the AA and Cooper Union and in California and in other schools around the world, and by many of these individual practitioners for a freer, more investigative, less trammeled, less restricted, crazier, more spontaneous architecture, that inquiry, that struggle is something that will persist. And that the kind of energy that was liberated by the kind of counterculture of the 60s, which was the formation of many of the architects of this generation, will continue to infuse the work. Okay.
A new architectural sensibility is now taking shape internationally that is challenging postmodernism and transforming modernism. Both young and established architects are designing intense, complex, seemingly accidental works that are not about symmetry or regular rhythmic order, but about the erosion of what might be called architectural certainty. Euclidean geometry, classical Renaissance space, even functionalism are not the assumptions in buildings that have no centers or boundaries. Designs seem exploded and chaotic, with fragments moving in force fields independent of even gravity. Walls cant and columns incline. Optical tricks make spaces illusory. The regular steel frame and the architectural box with four walls and corners are no longer the rule. This group of architects has pursued investigations not in the context of architectural tradition or the machine, but in the context of their own time. Einstein, genetic engineering, outer space, Hiroshima. Architects have even looked to painting, film, philosophy, and poetry to substantiate designs with meanings beyond fashion. After the Mauve postmodernist revolution, they wanted to link the eye to the mind again. It is not an architecture for an imaginary world centered and unified by a single philosophy, religion, or figure, but an architecture without hierarchical order, buildings made of independent parts and systems. It is not perfect architecture for a perfectible world, but architecture that assumes the world as it exists and projects a model for it. Not an architecture of rules, but a no-rules architecture.
Der Dekonstruktivismus ist sicher eine neue Tendenz, die vieles.
For me, deconstructivism is a new trend which will bring to a close much that was before. In fact, I believe that the tradition of the modern is only currently achieving its actual representation. There is now a neo-modernism. The whole scene has become very much enriched and very complex and cannot be defined as a one-track situation. One cannot say deconstructivism is the new architecture now, but there is something like a second modernism now whose scope is much broader. It comprises more than the original dogma of modernism and stands for more than the classical modernism of the 1920s stood for, more than only the avant-garde.
Mehr als nur die Avantgarde.
In July of 1988, the Museum of Modern Art in New York opened the show Deconstructivist Architecture, one of the first public events to recognize deconstructivism as a body of work and a new sensibility.
Good evening. My name is Mark Wigley, and I'd like to welcome you to the museum. We are here, of course, for a symposium on issues raised by an exhibition that opened last week called Deconstructivist Architecture.
The small exhibition drew considerable press but oversimplified a complex phenomenon, reducing the wide-ranging experiments into a single look that one critic likened to an explosion in a chopstick factory. The show seemed to propose simply a new kind of box. Ironically, the exhibition managed to stand for what the architects had subverted by their own work: notions of fashion and authority, packaged ideas, and the implication that this architecture is not only a style, but the new style.
The exhibition doesn't define what the future of architecture will be. These aren't 10 masterworks which should be imitated. They are no more than 10 more or less successful experiments. And each of them is a slightly different kind of experiment. And the exhibition marks about 10 years of experimentation that went on in parallel to postmodernism. In other words, these are 7 architects who never took postmodernism seriously, who always understood their work to inhabit the familiar ready-made language of modernism, and have been experimenting away, testing the limits of that language.
I believe that the show is not simply a development in architecture. I believe it represents a fundamental breach in the way we represent ourselves in architecture. The show, first and most importantly, is a set of responses to the fact that architecture, to a group of people who found architecture to be seriously, spiritually, and intellectually destitute and bankrupt. And there is a great deal of grasping to find solutions to that. If you need an example of an institution which might be pretty, like postmodernist architecture, but at the same time spiritually bankrupt, consider the monarchy of England. I'm sure Prince Charles are okay, you know, they're nice guys, I'm sure the Queen is okay. But quite clearly, the representation of a genetic superiority is a spiritually bankrupt idea, and nothing can recover that. It's a funny example, but it's not an accidental example. It's not accidental, for example, that Prince Charles is proselytizing a reactionary architecture.
Prince Charles went to Pittsburgh recently and talked about taking the steel plants and gentrifying them and making boutiques out of them. And everybody said, we don't want to do that. That's not what Pittsburgh's about. Prince Charles doesn't understand anything. Pittsburgh's a tough city, and there's a tough world out there. We don't want to gentrify steel mills. And I think that's what postmodernism was all about.
Gabled roofs and shingles, pediments, triumphal arches, columns, and colonnades were all the architectural news in the 1970s and early 80s. Vernacular and classical architecture, the decorated shed, and the figural building had returned. The avant-garde was heading toward the rear. Postmodernists railed against the simplicity and clarity of modernism with its emphasis on structural honesty and function. They wanted to broaden the expressive range of architecture with memory and associations. Buildings could be colored and decorated with sculpture and painting. They could speak in metaphors with irony. Inside and outside, the designs were symmetrically composed and organized with axes and terminating points that centered the building and the human being in it. All was ordered, and everything had its place in an architecture viewed as finite and coherent.
I think postmodernism was really much more of an American thing than it was a European condition. I think it had to do with America's desire to acquire culture, which they thought they never had. They didn't realize they have a kind of very wealthy 20th century culture.
I think that that neoclassicism, while there are some wonderful examples of it, certainly in the world, Schinkel and so on, never really interested me. And when I saw that my colleagues were interested in that again, I became angry.
The impact of the postmodernist, I hope it's the end of a bad dream.
Deconstructivism has evolved from modernism, but the shifts are profound. Modernists intended to improve living conditions at all social levels with industrially produced buildings. Deconstructivists may have looked to abstract modernist forms, but the modernist floor plan is no longer the building's only generator, and the machine no longer its central image. Deconstructivism is not a revival, not a neo-modernist style.
I don't look with nostalgia at modernism as being the prototype of what is happening today. Quite on the contrary, I see it as a very informative and key dimension, but one which, because of its utopian strain, signifies rather different things. And certainly my own work and those of many others who practice today does not have the utopian connotations, does not have the notion of the perfect world, rather accepts what architecture tradition has accepted, the imperfection, the fact that architecture is practiced in a world which is already lost, and that architecture as a symbol is a form of resistance to the corruption of society at any point of time.
The modern project was not yet started. It was always kind of started, but yet always aborted, and it was never fulfilled and completed. And it was with this kind of really exciting kind of premise that the work was started, that, you know, there is new territories to invade, new kind of things to invent, and that there had to be a certain newness in architecture which has yet to be discovered.
Working in the East End of London, in a Victorian school building that is the antithesis of the architecture she designs, Iraqi-born Zaha Hadid has been a charismatic leader for a whole generation of young architects and students. A graduate of London's Architectural Association, she became an international figure in the architectural world in 1983 when she won the competition for the Peak, a sports club in the heights above Hong Kong, an extraordinary dynamic project dramatically rendered that established in one summary building a different vision of what architecture could be.
Zaha Hadid is a great lady. She is single-minded in her determination to further the agenda of the modern movement. And her interests, basically, are to do with painting and architecture in Russia and in Germany and in the United States, pre-World War II. And she has certain interest in the work of Mies van der Rohe and Oscar Niemeyer and a few others in the post-World War II era. But essentially, she feels that they opened up a field of inquiry which is not really being consummated, and she's working at it. Her current work I find extremely interesting because it has to do with a sort of a lightness of touch and what might be seen to be a defiance of gravity on occasion. But it is essentially dealing with the metaphor that there is a field of force and there's a field of gravity, and that the field of force pressures objects in space, and the objects in space can be somehow defined by this kind of dynamic tension. And it's a metaphor. And I suppose to get close to her imagination, one would have to imagine something which is invisible, which is the field in which her objects somehow are related. When the time comes when she gets a bit of building experience under her belt, I think she's going to make an enormous contribution into the world of built architecture. At the moment, she's an inspiring lady for students all over the world, and an inspiring lady for architects who feel as if it's time when you might have a different set of references and so on, and she's providing it.
I taught at the AA, but worked on my own work. And, you know, it was kind of a series of events which led one to certain moves, in a sense. I mean, we did a lot of competitions and projects which were in part theoretical, but in part really done that they are realizable. But obviously, it all kind of culminated when I won the Peak, you know, 4 or 5 years ago. The interesting thing was that because of this earlier training at the school in London and through teaching, one was able to be able to reinterpret the program or the brief which was given to us. The brief was very simply a gentleman's club on the top of the mountain with some hotel, with maybe some housing. And we felt it had to be kind of a complete entity, so we really saw it more like an elevated resort. So if you imagine that all the earth where this rests has been taken away up to about, this point. I mean, it's not abstract model, it's fairly kind of actually accurate, but it's obviously abstract because there's no mountain here. This is where you will be you come on the road, you drive or you walk on this ramp, you dropped off on these kind of open air platforms. You either go into an enclosed bridge into what we call a man-made mountain, which is the indoor facilities of the club, or you take this kind of open one to all the reading platforms and the library, and descend into kind of rest areas which relate to the pool. And this is a lap pool which has on its edge all the dressing rooms, which crashes into the restaurants and all the lounges. So one was an interest to actually establish an open, a compressed urban space, because as you walk up the mountain, you always have constant view to the city. And also, it was important to really have this constant juxtaposition between like the cars driving through and the kind of swimmers and the readers all kind of always intertwined together. So there's kind of constant kind of juxtaposition between all the activities within the club, but also in the same way that these things are also stacked over each other in terms of different programs. It is not to do with pastiche, it's not to do with just decorating facades, but it is to do with the essence of architecture.
Rem Koolhaas, an architect practicing in Rotterdam, researched the work of the constructivists during many trips to Russia in the 1970s. His own work, however, was not a revival, but became a stage for an encounter between the Russians and other modernists. With his former partner, Ilya Zengalis, Koolhaas studied not only the look of dynamism, but also the social dynamics of modern cities with their high densities and varied activities. His new urbanism abandons pretensions of harmony and overall coherence in favor of tensions and contradictions.
It really irritates me if people say, whenever they're asked whether there is a deconstructivist movement, and if yes, whether they're part of it, that they say no, because everybody's natural instinct is to say no to such a question, because and it is true that there has recently been a very limiting interpretation of what it might be if there exists a group, and that interpretation has mostly to do with external symptoms like sloping walls and fragments. And it is true that that interpretation of deconstructivism, or that version, interests me only very marginally. I'm deliberately, in a way, in our own designs, trying to skirt this issue and to skirt this interpretation and try to propose some other elements that are much more to do with with the reintegration of all the fragments.
Finished in 1987, the Netherlands Dance Theatre in The Hague is part of a new downtown cultural center which includes a concert hall, a hotel, and plans for a new city hall.
You can see that our building is in a way hidden by the concert hall and the hotel, and that has meant that in this turbulence and in this general mediocrity, not to say ugliness, of most of the components in this context, we did not think it was worth making a beautiful exterior. We just wanted to represent the presence of this building with a few symbols. We added at the last moment in the whole design process this golden cone, which is a restaurant, which centers the whole composition. You see this wavy line, which is the wave of the auditorium and which indicates some degree of pleasure in the whole thing. And we added this mural on the side of the stage tower, also as a kind of representative of the presence of the theaters.
The auditorium is very serene, a dark space that forms a continuity with the stage itself. Where, again, with theoretical techniques, mostly light, we emphasize 4 elements. We light the ceiling, almost like a tent, floating over the people. Then there are 3 acoustical barriers on each side, gold, that you also light, the dark blue color of the velvet of the chairs, and the special curtain that we developed, which is gold balls on gray velvet, which looks like liquid light. Now, this is the foyer that both separates and connects buildings. It is a continuation of a void between the 2 towers, so it's seen as a void. And in this void, there are arranged on 3 levels bars and public spaces. This is a space underneath the auditorium, which we were given in a way which we simply had, and also because of our very constrained budget, decided to use it. So therefore, you have this space that goes and ends there in a very low area near the golden column. We put a lot of light there. And the irony is that when it's full of people, everybody goes there. You know, somehow it is like a mysterious attraction. All the elements here are conceived almost like flying saucers floating in this void, which is something that you'll be able to see at night much more because you have all the reflections. And within the kind of strictness of the building, all the spaces that have to do with the public are curved either in section or in plan. And this space, which you see here, has both. I mean, it's shaped like a scallop, and because we had the space available underneath the auditorium, it's also curved in section. Then you see the balcony, and as a third element, major element in the foyer, this satellite, which is the bar where they only serve champagne. I think that what characterizes deconstructivism, if anything characterizes it, it's sloping planes and asymmetries and a sense of floating. I think that, you know, maybe in the history of the short history of the movement, this is the most nearest it has come to suspending gravity, at least for the scale of this bar, which ultimately can act like a space shuttle for 180 people.
In Japan, where the works of Derrida and other French philosophers of deconstruction have been known to architects for some time, new buildings are showing evidence of a deconstructivist approach. A 4-story, wedge-shaped building in Tokyo housing boutiques was designed by the young Japanese architect Hajime Yatsuka.
In the traditional modernist buildings, there was a belief that language and physical structure had to be one. In this building, although structurally sound, it is not the case. For example, the wall that you see appears to be solid concrete, but it is actually steel toward the top. The red steel roof appears to be held up by steel wires, but in reality it is held up by concrete walls. So here, language has become autonomous. It is independent of physical structure. So while this building seems to be employing a modernist vocabulary, the method is beyond modernism.
Constructivism was a major trend of 1910s and 20s Soviet art whose abstract aesthetic experiments and radical social goals came to influence architects. They designed buildings with bold geometries, expressed structural parts, and new programs intended to shape the new revolutionary society.
What interested me the most about the whole enterprise of constructivism is that it was a rare moment when architecture became a preoccupation of the state and became the instrument of the state to imagine and invent new ways of living.
Because it was a new kind of living cultural condition and political one, it required and demanded a new kind of architecture. And it meant that they rewrote the program for the new projects which they designed. So for us, it was more important that research, the notion of a laboratory, and to developing a new kind of architecture was, in a sense, more important than what it looked like.
Einer der Unterschiede zwischen Konstruktivismus und vielleicht Dekonstruktivismus.
One of the differences between deconstructivism and constructivism could be that it has become clear since the decades between the world wars that the new man for a new society cannot be created. That was the basic assumption of constructivism.
Eine der Grundlagen und Annahmen des Konstruktivismus war.
In 1983, the New York architect Peter Eisenman won a competition to design a major art center for the Ohio State University at Columbus.
So why don't we go in?
His first major commission to be built in the United States.
This building was designed for 21st century art.
I understand that.
Frameless art, pedestal-less art.
So any resistance...
I mean, we're talking about lasers, performance, a whole different concept of art. The resistance is toward 19th century and 18th century art.
To the art object,
Yeah.
the precious
object, the framed, pedestaled object.
Right.
People have been concerned with relating from themselves to the physical environment as a source of security. And I believe if the physical environment makes them anxious, they might turn inward. And the true source of security is internal. The physical environment can never provide that. It can provide physical comfort, shelter, but it never can provide psychological shelter. Well, there will be a trace. As a matter of fact, up in the scaffolding, remember, there'll be a piece that comes in the scaffolding, which will be the trace of the old building. Where the cornice, you see the cornice is cut.
Where the cornice just ends.
So let's go out, let's go down through the building and then, got a great day to shoot.
Really good.
Thanks.
I'm very impressed.
Yeah, it has a lot of quality. What we've tried to do is ask our buildings to provide psychological shelter. Now, if we disrupt that psychological sheltering and say, hey, psychological shelter is internal, then you're going to have a new relationship to the physical environment, and all other kinds of wonderful things are possible. And those wonderful things, those displacements of the relationship that has provided shelter as psychological comfort, is what we're looking at. It really is a disturbing space, completely dislocating every time you don't know where you are, or what level you are. You never know. Look at this.
This is an incredible part.
Yeah.
How did you do that? How is it supported?
Danielle, you know what's nice is, you see the green scaffold is below the knife edge piece here?
Yeah.
The green goes up way above it. In other words, the knife edge piece looks like it's in perspective, right? But it's flat, and the other thing's going up, and that's what makes the thing work. This one is square going up. It looks like, yeah.
But you can't tell, you have no reference.
No.
You cannot tell where the infinite is, this way or that way or nowhere.
The green thing goes way above the white, you realize
Really?
that?
Because the green
Yeah.
thing actually looks like it's going down.
Down, I know. It goes up.
It goes up.
Yeah, above. I don't think we're going to make any more sticks in this thing.
Peter Eisenman challenges the traditional premises of modernism, that form should follow function, site, and structure. Form for Eisenman follows theory, frequently theory about meaning and language and how to design in relationship to that theory. He questions the usual coordinates by which people orient themselves.
Or the changing of materials.
Every project I have, I tell my clients this, that we are interested in causing risk, putting you at risk. We don't know what we're going to do, we don't know why we're going to do it, and we don't know what the result's going to be. We can't guarantee anything. More closer?
He is always interested in architect change and is moving away from the purely intellectual and rational to investigate realms that are unknowable, what he calls the uncanny.
Underneath here.
Of tension and energy.
You know, you drive around and see stick buildings under construction, they look wonderful. I know the Famillion house looks like Hurricane Charlie just came through and wiped out the place. My intention was to connect with the energy of buildings under construction, which look better than buildings completed. And so I was trying to get an immediacy that I find in an Impressionist painting 100 years later. Has it? How did they do it? In architecture, it's a little more difficult. When you first hatch the idea, when a drawing or a model, there is a spontaneity, and so many architects lose that. You've seen over the years, many people have that beautiful drawing quality, and they lose it as it gets to the building. I think there is a sense that I guard very carefully from the drawings, the models, to the finished building, and I aim at the finished building. The drawings and the models are incidental.
Gary breaks his buildings down into their constructive and functional parts, exposing, for example, the wood studs in a wall or detaching the living room from a bedroom. The breakage and the juxtaposition of different shapes creates a combustive visual energy, unusual in the domestic California landscape.
The client for this house is the Schnabel family. The owners are presently the American ambassador of Finland. I visited them in Finland. We went to Vitrosk, Saarinen's home, and sat on the lake. And the lake was beautiful with the trees shimmering at sunset, and the Schnabels loved that, and I tried to incorporate a little bit of that attitude here. So this is a lake I'm standing in. It's only going to be about a foot deep, with river stones that we're hoping to bring from Finland. And then the lake became the bedroom wing, bedroom garden, bathrooms open up into the lake. So it's like a churchyard, that's the church, and then there's this swimming pool here, or this lake. That was the idea. And then the separate little rooms, they have children. This is their young boys' room, which is like a studio. And then the girls each have bedrooms up there.
How much higher than that?
That's
you go like, you got 5 feet more or something.
I was raised to believe in the present and the future, and that looking backwards seemed like selling out. All my feelings about time and place have to do with what's really going on, trying to figure out what is really happening. And the reality to me, when you drive down the streets of LA, is junk and chaos, and so it doesn't feel right to me to make a pretty little garden, put a wall around it, and cut out that reality. That's a lie.
Pull them away and erode a canyon around it. It starts to make some sense.
When I found myself in my own practice in 1962, it so happened I was a student of painting. I knew Jasper John's work, I knew Rauschenberg's work, I knew all these people that were working with, more or less, with junk in their work, and incorporated the detritus, or whatever you call it, of the world into their art. So it led me to a whole series of buildings where I used the rough carpentry, where I used the metal as it came off the shelf. It was in the air, kind of, in the art world. It wasn't in the air in architecture. Architects were horrified by all that.
I mean, that can be parallel.
No, I like it.
I do too.
I was intuitive, and I was very responding to what I had available to me. I don't know. My gut tells me to go windows, make it real building, windows all the way around.
Yeah, I think so. And then
that's one idea. It's strong. Then do this, collide with these earth forms here. Mm-hmm. Design this piece from the inside as a courtyard. So you're coming into a place, design it from there. This is the freeway building. I find I'm embraced by a lot of movement. I think I'm just a funny guy that, goes along with a lot of people. I'm open to a lot of theories and ideas. I explore them. I'm willing to accept them as real if they're there, if somebody says them, and that it's worth listening to. I'm curious. I'm a curious one.
I'm very interested in the work of my friends at Co-op Himmelblau. I think their work is very original. I think that it is invested in a kind of 60s set of issues, including issues of direct architecture, spontaneous creation, an architecture that's engaged with the idea of intervention within the urban context. So to me, this is in many ways the most suggestive and sympathetic architecture within that group.
An optimism about the social and emotional potential of architecture inspired Viennese architects Wolfgang Prix and Helmut Swieczynski to name their firm Coop Himmelblau, or Blue Sky Cooperative. It is the spontaneity of the first drawing, the moment of conception, that they try to build, always resisting the tendency of the construction process to regularize and conventionalize the design and flatten the feeling. Coop Himmelblau's new factory in southern Austria is a major deconstructivist commentary on how the design of an industrial structure need not be based on the logic of mechanical efficiency and functionalism. Its artistic profile, in fact, facilitated building permits in a zone of historic Roman ruins where few new buildings have been allowed.
The factory looks its best in spring, when it is surrounded by greenery, when it is sunny, and when the skies are blue. The dancing chimneys have totally normal functions. They just simply dance. Well, when we were designing these chimneys, we felt, why not have leaning chimneys? This gives an idea of our way of designing, seemingly in a totally arbitrary manner. But through this arbitrariness, we eliminate all the usual restrictions. It keeps us from practicing advance obedience.
Wir üben keinen vorauseilenden Gehorsam. Wir entwerfen ganz frei.
We design in total freedom and worry later how our designs could be built, how we will get approval for them, how they could be built in the face of much resistance.
Wir sind hier in Wien im ersten Bezirk, mitten im Herz der Stadt und auf unserer derzeit größten Baustelle in dieser Stadt.
This is the very heart of Vienna, the site of our most important commission right now, the future conference room of a law firm in the attic of a landmark building.
Es ist deswegen für uns so interessant, weil es das erste Mal die Abhandlung ist über Implosion und Explosion. Das heißt,
it is very important to us because for the first time we are able to work with implosion as well as explosion. Our design for this project includes the environment as seen from the inside as well as the view from the outside.
Von außen nach innen. Dieses Projekt ist nicht nur eine Abhandlung über Ecklösungen in dieser Stadt, sondern es ist auch eine Abhandlung über Rückgrat in der Architektur, weil der wesentliche Teil dieses Dachbodenausbaus ist ein Träger.
It is also a project about the spine in architecture, because an important aspect is a beam which creates a visual line from the street up to the roof, spanning the whole roof and holding this cupola.
Praktisch überspannt und diese Kuppel hält.
Ich glaube, dass der Dekonstruktivismus in seinen besten Beispielen wirklich etwas zeigt von dem, was unsere Lebensauffassung heute ist.
I believe in its best examples, deconstructivism is an indication of how we perceive our lives today. And a good part of it is the uncertainty we feel. It is also a protest against consumerism, against the ready-made product. Art plays a part as well, aesthetics, consciously applied aesthetic language to say no to everything that is our daily life, to that consumerism. For instance, the recently built High Solar Institute at Stuttgart University, designed by the architects Behnisch and Partners, in which Coop Himmelblau was also indirectly involved, is such an example. First, it represents a redefinition of their own work. But it is also an example of how even a place as straightforward as a science institute can become an adventurous space, how it gains in strength through constant confrontation with the built environment in which the scientists themselves exist, after all.
Es ist eine Umwelt, in der man sich, meine ich, nicht absolut sicher fühlen kann. In der auch
It is an environment in which I think one cannot feel absolutely secure, where questions remain open and in which the resolution and totality of the undertaking remains in doubt. as well as the totality of one's own existence. Things are assembled out of many individual parts which threaten to fall to pieces. But they stay in place, they hold together. That is due to the tension that is created here. And this has also a very poetic expression which makes one feel liberated. It does not constrain us into something commonplace. It gives us a sense of having experienced something new. And this new experience, I feel, has a liberating effect. It does not confirm simply all that which has been accepted everywhere.
The median of one of Los Angeles' busiest freeways was the surprising site for a competition for a monumental cultural center that the city of Los Angeles hopes will equal the significance of the Eiffel Tower in Paris and the Statue of Liberty in New York. The winning scheme is a long horizontal monument, low like the city of Los Angeles itself, with many separate parts, all intricately connected with a delicately engineered asymmetrical steel frame poised in dynamic tension. The frame supports an immigration museum, an aquarium, theater, and library. The project commemorates the city's history of immigration. Lisanne Couture and Hani Rashid, architects based in New York, won the competition.
The project has been titled or called by us affectionately the Steel Cloud, which has its direct kind of roots situated in the paintings of Magritte and the writings of André Breton. So the intention was to really visit this metaphysical idea of floating some cloud-like structures above the freeway, but at the same time, they're actually of steel and made of the stuff of the automobile, of technology, of the post-industrial revolution.
We were interested in expressing the monument as a living monument and not just having it a static thing to be experienced more by visitors to the city, but something that would really be part of the life of the city. Well, I studied with Frank Gehry at Yale, and I briefly worked with Peter Eisenman some time after I finished school, and Henny.
Well, I worked a great deal with Daniel Libeskind, but I think the interesting thing that tempers us as a group, and also it maybe is symptomatic of this generation, is that we, neither of us are kind of embedded in the thinking of our particular professors. We both come from it, we both grew from it, and I think this is where we kind of we do temper each other's work. We do add a kind of an edge to the work, and the fact of the matter is that these teachers are really very much at odds with each other once inside the problem of this kind of architecture, and that goes for us too in terms of what our ideas are and what we're after in our generation. I think for us the idea of building is paramount. We really believe that it's necessary now to engage the world and somehow ground the work. Actually try and put down some of these ideas in the ground, figuratively and literally, and let's see where these experiments can lead. We are, after all, the turn of the century, and it's in our hands, one could say.